The 911 call that changed everything. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, a 19-year-old woman called 911 from inside her own apartment. She was injured, she was frightened, and according to the emergency call transcript, she told the dispatcher that someone had broken in and shot her. But when officers arrived, the person who had attacked Rachel Hansen was gone. There was no suspect waiting outside, no obvious explanation for why Rachel had been targeted, and no immediate answer to the question that would haunt her family for years.
A new $20,000 reward in a Gilbert murder case. I'm ABC 15's Ashley Holden sitting down with Rachel Hansen's family.
Of course, her stocking hangs with everyone's, so she's with us.
Special ornaments, pictures, and of course memories of Rachel Hansen fill her family's home, but the teen's absence is felt each day.
It's really hard because you realize the number of pictures of her are limited. There are no more.
Who entered Rachel's apartment in the middle of the night, and why? For years later, Rachel's murder remains unsolved, but investigators now say they have a strong theory about what happened. The problem is that a theory is not the same as proof, and until the missing evidence is found, the person responsible may still be walking free. This is a story of Rachel Hansen, a young woman whose final moments were captured not by a security camera, but by her own desperate call for help.
The teen. Appearing to go inside one neighboring apartment and return sometime during the day. Also released Thursday, a transcript of the 911 call made by Rachel herself. It shows the teen told dispatchers someone broke in and
Rachel Hansen. Rachel Hansen was 19 years old when her life was taken. She lived in Gilbert, Arizona, in an apartment near the Santon Village area. To the people who knew her, Rachel was not just a name in a police report. She was a daughter, a friend, and a young woman with a future that had barely begun. Her parents, Todd and Kim Hansen, have spent years trying to preserve her memory while searching for answers. They have spoken publicly about Rachel, shared her story, and continued asking anyone with information to come forward. In her honor, Rachel's family also operates a dog rescue. Every person who comes to adopt an animal becomes another opportunity to tell Rachel's story and to remind the public that someone, somewhere, may know what happened. But before Rachel became the center of an unsolved murder investigation, she was simply a young woman living in her own home, a place where she should have been safe. The early morning attack. In the early morning hours of June 4th, 2022, something happened inside Rachel's apartment. According to the 911 transcript released by authorities, Rachel told the dispatcher that someone had broken into the apartment and shot her. She also indicated that the attacker had left and was no longer inside with her. That detail immediately created a frightening picture. A person had entered a residence during the night. Rachel had survived long enough to call for help, and the attacker had escaped before police arrived. The call was not made by a neighbor who heard a disturbance. It was not made by a friend who discovered something unusual. Rachel herself reached out to emergency services after being shot. That means the first known account of the attack came directly from a victim, but the call also raised questions investigators would have to examine carefully. How did the intruder get inside? Was the apartment targeted? Or was Rachel targeted? Did the attacker know her? Was the shooting planned? And how did someone enter, fire a weapon, and leave without being identified? Those questions became even more important because Rachel was inside a gated apartment community. A gate can create a sense of security, but it does not guarantee that every person entering the property is known or recorded. The response. After Rachel called 911, officers rushed to the apartment. In body camera footage released more than 2 years after the shooting, officers could be seen responding to the scene, securing the area, and attempting to communicate with Rachel. The footage was heavily redacted, and many conversations were blurred or had their audio removed. For Rachel's parents, hearing the emergency response was devastating. The footage did not provide the answers they were hoping for. It did not reveal the identity of the person who shot Rachel. It did not explain why she had been attacked, but it showed something deeply painful. Rachel had been alive long enough to ask for help. She knew something terrible had happened, and she was still waiting for someone to save her. Rachel was transported to the hospital, but she later died from her injuries. The initial investigation became a homicide case, and detectives began working to reconstruct what happened inside the apartment and what the killer did after leaving, a case without an arrest. In many homicide investigations, the first few hours are critical. Detectives look for witnesses, surveillance footage, phone records, forensic evidence, and any connection between the victim and possible suspects. They examine the scene and try to determine whether the crime was random or personal. But Rachel's case did not produce a quick arrest. No one was publicly identified as the killer. No suspect was charged. And as the years passed, the family was left with a painful uncertainty. Was the case moving forward, or had the investigation reached a dead end? A police report released in 2024 reportedly stated that investigative leads had been exhausted at that time, but that position later changed. In 2026, Gilbert police described the case as active and said detectives were following leads and examining additional information. The department also confirmed that new supplemental material had been added to the investigation. That change matters. It does not mean the case has been solved. It does not mean an arrest is imminent. And it does not prove that investigators have identified the killer. But it does suggest that law enforcement believes there may still be evidence worth pursuing. The strong theory. At the 4-year mark, Gilbert police publicly acknowledged something they had not previously discussed in detail. They said investigators had a strong theory about what occurred, but the department also made clear that the theory still needed to be supported by facts and evidence. That distinction is crucial. A theory can explain the available information. It can help detectives decide which leads to follow. It can point investigators toward a person, a motive, or a sequence of events. But a theory cannot replace physical evidence. It cannot establish guilt in court. And it cannot answer every question the public has about Rachel's death. Police declined to reveal important details, including whether a specific person remains under investigation or what evidence supports the theory. Officials said releasing more information could compromise the ongoing case. For Rachel's family, that explanation may be understandable, but is also incredibly difficult. They have waited years for answers. They have watched public attention come and go. And they still do not know who entered Rachel's apartment that night. The question that remains, the most disturbing part of Rachel Hansen's case, may be how little is publicly known about the person who attacked her. Someone entered the apartment. Someone fired a fatal shot. Someone left before police arrived. That person may have known Rachel, or the attack may have been connected to something investigators have not yet revealed. At this stage, the public cannot responsibly declare which theory is correct. There's been no conviction, and no one should be accused without verified evidence. But one fact remains undeniable. Rachel called for help from the place where she should have felt safest, and whoever entered her home that night has not yet been held accountable. We will examine the strange events reported around Rachel's apartment before the shooting, the questions surrounding possible threats, and why investigators are continued looking at what happened in the days leading up to June 4th, 2022. The strange events before the shooting. Before Rachel Hansen was shot, there were reportedly warning signs around her apartment. They were strange enough to make people uncomfortable, but not clear enough at the time to reveal what was about to happen. That is one of the most frustrating parts of this case. Looking back, certain events may appear connected, but investigators must still determine whether those incidents were truly warnings or simply unrelated events that gained importance after Rachel's death. A disturbing pattern. According to information discussed in reporting about the case, Rachel experienced unusual incidents in the days leading up to the shooting. One reported event involved a person entering or appearing inside her apartment while she was asleep. In some accounts, Rachel woke up and saw a dark figure standing over her bed. The person then left before the situation became a direct confrontation. At the time, Rachel may not have known whether the person was a burglar, an intruder, or someone who had made a mistake. But if the incident happened as described, it created a terrifying possibility. Someone may have already been watching Rachel before the shooting. The question is not simply whether an unknown person entered the apartment. The bigger question is whether that person was testing the location, searching for Rachel, or trying to frighten her. Or was it an unrelated incident that investigators later connected to the murder because of the timing? That distinction matters. In a criminal investigation, a suspicious event is not automatically evidence of a planned attack. It must be supported by witness accounts, physical evidence, surveillance footage, phone data, or some other reliable information. The night before, public accounts of the case have described another incident occurring shortly before Rachel was fatally shot. The reported sequence is disturbing. An unknown figure allegedly appeared inside the apartment one night, and then, in the early morning hours of June 4th, 2022, someone entered again and shot Rachel. If those events were connected, the attacker may have returned after an earlier attempt or after discovering that Rachel was present. But there is another possibility. The first incident may have been an unrelated disturbance, while the shooting was committed by someone else entirely. At this stage, the public does not have enough verified information to choose between those explanations. That is why details surrounding the days before Rachel's death are so important. They could help establish whether the shooting was random or deliberate. A random intruder may have entered the apartment looking for property. A targeted attacker may have known Rachel's routine, her location, and the layout of the apartment. Those two scenarios would lead investigators in very different directions. Was Rachel targeted? One fact repeatedly discussed in coverage of the case is that nothing significant was reported stolen from the apartment. Some public accounts have described the shooting as appearing targeted, but police have not publicly confirmed a motive or identified the person responsible. If there was no obvious theft, then investigators would have to examine other possible motives. Was Rachel involved in a personal dispute? Did someone know where she lived? Was someone trying to intimidate her? Did the attacker believe she possessed information or property? Or did the shooting begin as a break-in and turn violent unexpectedly? These are investigative questions, not conclusions. Rachel's family has suggested that some unusual circumstances before the murder may not have received the attention they deserved early in the investigation. That concern is understandable. When a case remains unsolved, families naturally revisit every detail, every conversation, and every warning sign. But hindsight can also be dangerous. Once people know how a story ends, earlier events can appear more meaningful than they seemed at the time. That is why detectives must separate verified evidence from assumptions. The apartment complex. Rachel lived inside a gated apartment community near Ray Road and Senton Village Parkway in Gilbert. Her apartment was identified in public reporting as being of the Redstone Apartments. A gated community can make residents feel protected, but gates do not explain who entered the property, how they entered, or whether the attacker was already inside. Investigators would need to examine several possibilities. Was the gate functioning properly that night? Were there security cameras near the entrances? Did the attacker enter through a gate, follow another vehicle, or approach on foot? Was the person known to residents? Did anyone see a vehicle, pedestrian, or suspicious activity? Were there cameras near the building or nearby businesses? Even if cameras existed, video evidence is not always conclusive. A camera might show a vehicle without capturing a license plate. It might record a person from a distance without revealing a face. It might also have gaps, poor lighting, or a limited field of view. Still, in an apartment complex, the question of access can be critical. If the attacker was a stranger, investigators would need to understand how that person located Rachel's apartment. If the attacker knew Rachel, detectives would need to examine her relationships, contacts, routines, and recent conflicts. A warning or a coincidence? The alleged earlier intrusion creates one of the most important unanswered questions in the entire case. Did Rachel recognize the person who entered her apartment before the shooting? If she did, perhaps she could describe the person's clothing, height, voice, or behavior. If she did not, then the earlier event may provide only a vague description of an unknown figure. And if Rachel did not report the incident or did not believe it was serious enough to report, there may be little documentation available. That is how investigations can become difficult. A person may see something suspicious, but decide not to call police. A neighbor may hear a noise but assume it is ordinary. A victim may believe an incident is a misunderstanding. Only after a violent crime occurs do those details suddenly appear significant. In Rachel's case, every unusual event has to be tested against the available evidence. Was there a 911 call? Was there a police report? Was there damage to a door or window? Were fingerprints or DNA recovered? Was anything moved inside the apartment? Did anyone nearby see the person leave? Without answers to those questions, the public can identify a possible pattern, but cannot prove one. The threats. Other reporting has also referred to threats or concerning events in the weeks before Rachel's death. However, the specific details that could explain who made those threats, why they were made, and whether they were connected to the shooting have not been fully released. That lack of information has created room for speculation. Some people believe Rachel was being watched. Others believe the threats were unrelated to the homicide. And some believe investigators may know more than they are publicly revealing. The police department has repeatedly indicated that the case remains active and that certain information cannot be released because doing so could compromise the investigation. That explanation is common in an active homicide case. Detectives may be protecting evidence that only the killer would know. They may be waiting to compare future statements with details already established through forensic work. Or they may be withholding information because they do not want potential witnesses to change their memories after seeing media coverage. But for Rachel's parents, secrecy has a painful consequence. They are left with questions that cannot be answered publicly. The last hours. By the time the shooting occurred, Rachel was inside her bedroom. The attacker entered. A gun was fired. Rachel was seriously wounded, and the person responsible disappeared before officers arrived. The reported sequence makes the crime appear fast and deliberate, but investigators still need to establish the exact order of events. Was Rachel asleep when the attacker entered? Did she wake up before the shot was fired? Did she attempt to defend herself? Did the attacker say anything? Was the door forced open? Did the shooter leave through the same route used to enter? Every one of these details can help determine whether the killer was familiar with the apartment. But the public does not know how many of those questions have been answered privately by investigators. What is known is that Rachel managed to call 911. Officers responded, and emergency personnel took her to a hospital. Despite life-saving efforts, she died from her injuries. Her death was classified as a homicide, and the person who caused it remained unidentified. A case built around missing information. Rachel Hansen's case is not difficult because there are no questions. It is difficult because there are too many. The reported incidents before the shooting may point toward a pattern. The lack of a publicly identified suspect may point toward missing evidence. The gated apartment complex may contain clues about access. And Rachel's own 911 call may provide investigators with the final known moments of her life. But none of those details alone identifies the killer. The most important challenge is connecting them. If the earlier intrusions were connected to the shooting, then they may reveal planning. If they were not connected, investigators must avoid allowing a frightening coincidence to misdirect a case. And if Rachel was specifically targeted, the motive may be hidden inside a relationship or conflict that has not been made public. We will examine the 911 call, the police response, and evidence investigators may have been trying to reconstruct from the moments immediately after Rachel was shot, the 911 call, and the final minutes. At approximately 2:11 a.m. on June 4th, 2022, Rachel Hansen called 911 from inside her Gilbert apartment. The call lasted only a short time, but it became one of the most important pieces of information connected to the case. Rachel was not calling to report a noise. She was not calling because she felt unsafe. She was calling because she had been shot. According to the released transcript, Rachel told the dispatcher, "I've been shot." She then said, "Someone broke in and shot me," followed by an urgent request for help. Those words created the first official account of what had happened. But they also left investigators with a series of questions. Who was the person who broke in? How did that person enter? Was Rachel awake when the attack began? And how long had the attacker been inside the apartment before the gun was fired? The emergency call, the 911 transcript shows Rachel trying to communicate while seriously injured. At one point, she reportedly said, please hurry. She also told the dispatcher that she was bleeding. The words are brief, but they reveal the urgency of the moment. Rachel understood that she needed immediate medical attention. She had enough awareness to identify the emergency, give a location, and explain that the shooting followed an apparent break-in. However, the The transcript released to the public was redacted. Some information was removed, and the public has not heard the original audio recording. That means there may be details known to investigators that are not available to everyone else. Rachel may have provided additional information about the attacker. She may have described the person's clothing, voice, height, or direction of escape. She may have answered questions about where she was inside the apartment or whether anyone else was present. Without the full audio, those possibilities cannot be confirmed. The public must be careful not to treat missing portions of the transcript as proof that something was hidden for suspicious reasons. Redactions are often used to protect sensitive information, preserve evidence, or prevent the contamination of witness memories. Still, every missing word matters in a case with no public suspect. Did Rachel identify the shooter? Based on the information released publicly, Rachel did not identify the shooter by name. She described the person as someone who had broken into the apartment and shot her. That detail is important because it suggests Rachel did not openly tell the dispatcher that she recognized the attacker. But the statement does not answer whether she knew the person. A victim may describe someone as an intruder, even when the person is familiar to them. A person may also be recognized only after the attack begins, and in a dark bedroom, during a sudden violent encounter. Even a familiar face may be difficult to identify. The lack of a publicly named suspect does not necessarily mean Rachel had no information. It may simply mean that the available information was incomplete, unclear, or withheld from public release. The dispatcher's questions were focused on keeping Rachel alive and getting responders to the apartment. There was no opportunity for a long interview. This was not a formal statement taken in a quiet room. It was an emergency call from a wounded young woman trying to survive. The police response. After Rachel called 911, Gilbert police officers and emergency personnel were sent to the apartment. Officers arrived and found Rachel suffering from a gunshot wound. She was taken to a local hospital, where medical staff attempted to save her life. Despite those efforts, Rachel died several hours later. Public reporting places the time of death at approximately 5:20 a.m. on June 4th, 2022. The case was classified as a homicide. The response created a new crime scene. Investigators had to preserve the apartment, determine where the shooting occurred, search for physical evidence, and identify anything that could reveal how the attacker entered or escaped. That process would have included questions such as, was the front door locked? Was there visible damage to a door or window? Were there signs of forced entry? Where was Rachel located when she was shot? Was a weapon recovered? Were shell casings found? Did neighbors hear a gunshot? Were there fingerprints, DNA, or footprints? Did surveillance cameras capture anyone leaving? The public has not received complete answers to all of those questions. That lack of information has allowed speculation to grow around the case. But speculation cannot replace the evidence collected by investigators. The body camera footage, more than 2 years after Rachel's death. Gilbert police released officers were responding to a report of a wounded woman, but the person who allegedly shot her was no longer there. For Rachel's family, the release was emotionally painful. The footage offered a small window into the night they had been trying to understand for years. But it also emphasized what remained unknown. The camera could show officers responding after the attack. It could not show what happened before the gunshot. It could not identify the person who entered the apartment. And it could not explain why Rachel was targeted. Reconstructing the timeline. In any homicide investigation, the timeline begins long before the moment officers arrive. Detectives must determine what the victim was doing before the attack, who had contacted her, whether anyone had visited, and whether there were unusual events nearby. They also need to establish the timeline after the shooting. Who called 911? Who entered or left the apartment? Who spoke with Rachel? When did emergency personnel arrive? What areas were secured first? Was anything moved before investigators began processing the scene? The release police report reportedly contained hundreds of pages and described interviews, search warrants, and multiple strange occurrences around Rachel's apartment before the shooting. But a large report does not automatically mean that every mystery had been solved. A police file can contain many leads that go nowhere. It can include witness statements that conflict with one another. It can document searches that fail to recover usable evidence. and it can preserve theories that investigators later eliminate. The goal is not simply to collect information. The goal is to connect reliable information to a person who could be held accountable. The problem of the missing suspect, the most significant public fact, remains unchanged. No one has been arrested in Rachel Hansen's homicide. As of the latest available reporting, Gilbert police still describe the case as active. They have acknowledged additional supplements to the investigation, but they have not released those materials because doing so could compromise the case. This creates two very different realities. For investigators, the case may contain active leads and evidence that cannot yet be revealed. For the public, the case may appear almost frozen. Rachel's family knows that police are still working, but they do not have the answers they need. They do not know who killed her, why the person entered the apartment, or what evidence could finally lead to an arrest. That gap between an active investigation and a public mystery is one of the most painful aspects of an unsolved homicide. What the call confirms. Rachel's 911 call confirms several critical facts. She was alive after the shooting. She understood that she had been shot. She believed someone had broken into the apartment. She was bleeding and needed urgent assistance. The call also establishes a narrow window between the shooting and the arrival of police. But the call does not publicly confirm the shooter's identity. It does not establish the motive. It does not prove whether the attacker was a stranger or someone Rachel knew. And it does not explain how that person escaped. Those questions remained at the center of the investigation. The last known voice. Rachel's final known words were not recorded in the courtroom or written in a diary. They were spoken during an emergency call, a frightened voice asking strangers to send help. That call became a piece of evidence, but it was also the last known attempt Rachel made to protect herself. She had survived the shooting long enough to reach the phone. She had tried to tell authorities what happened, and still, the person who attacked her disappeared. We will examine the investigation that followed, the police report, the search for evidence, the reward offer for information, and the reason Rachel's family believes someone may know more than they have said. The police filed the reward and the person of interest. For years, Rachel Hansen's family had been asking for information. They wanted to know what investigators had discovered. They wanted to know whether anyone had been identified. And most importantly, they wanted to know why no one had been arrested. In 2024, a heavily redacted police report was released to the public. The file contained hundreds of pages, but many sections were blacked out or incomplete. It revealed that detectives had pursued multiple leads, examined phone records, interviewed people connected to Rachel, and investigated suspicious activity surrounding the case. Yet the report did not provide the one answer everyone was waiting for. It did not name Rachel's killer. The 330-page file, a lengthy police report, can create the impression that investigators uncovered a large amount of evidence. But the number of pages does not necessarily show how close a case is to an arrest. A report may contain interviews, evidence logs, search warrant information, dispatch records, forensic documents, and follow-up notes. It may also include leads that were checked and eliminated. In Rachel's case, much of the report was redacted. That meant the public could see the shape of the investigation, but not all the details inside it. Names may have been removed. Specific evidence may have been withheld. Some witness accounts may have been blacked out, and information related to a possible person of interest was not fully available to the public. According to later reporting, the release file referred to a person of interest, but it did not establish that the person had been charged or proven responsible for Rachel's death. That distinction is essential. A person of interest is not automatically a suspect. A suspect is not automatically guilty, and an accusation is not a conviction. Without an arrest or court finding, no individual should be publicly identified as Rachel's killer. The investigation was once considered suspended. The release of the police file also raised a troubling issue. In February 2024, the investigation was reportedly described as having exhausted its investigative leads. The case was later characterized as suspended because detectives did not have enough new information to move forward. For Rachel's parents, that status was devastating. A suspended investigation can sound like the case has been abandoned. In reality, it may mean that active investigative steps have slowed because detectives have no immediate lead that can be developed. But for a grieving family, the difference between suspended and active can feel like everything. They are not looking at an administrative label. They are looking at the fact that their daughter was killed and no one has been held accountable. They are waiting for a name. They are waiting for an arrest. And they are waiting for someone with information to decide that silence is no longer acceptable. A change in the police position. By 2026, Gilbert police described the case differently. Investigators told ABC 15 that they had a strong theory and active leads. Police also confirmed that additional supplements had been added to the investigation after the earlier report was released. This represented a significant change in the public description of case. The department was no longer presenting the investigation as a matter of exhausted leads. Instead, police indicated that detectives were continuing to work the case and believed the available information pointed in a particular direction. But police did not reveal what that theory was. They did not publicly identify a suspect. They did not explain whether the theory involved a person known to Rachel. And they did not say what evidence could transform that theory into a prosecutable case. That silence may be frustrating, but there is a reason detectives often avoid discussing the details of an active homicide investigation. If the killer is still watching the case, public disclosures could reveal what police know. If an unknown witness comes forward, investigators may need to compare that person's account with details that have never been released. And if a future suspect makes a statement, detectives may want to know whether that person mentions facts only the perpetrator would know. What could be holding the case back? There are several reasons an investigation can continue for years without an arrest. The strongest possibility is that investigators have a theory, but not enough admissible evidence. Police may believe they know who had a motive. They may believe they know who could have accessed the apartment. They may even have evidence placing a person near the area. But to make an arrest in a homicide case, detectives and prosecutors need more than suspicion. They need evidence that can withstand challenges in court. That evidence might include DNA, fingerprints, digital records, surveillance footage, ballistic evidence, eyewitness testimony, or credible confession. Sometimes investigators have several pieces that seem suspicious individually, but do not form a complete chain. For example, a person may have known Rachel, but that does not prove the person entered her apartment. A person may have been near the complex, but that does not prove involvement in the shooting. A person may have made a threatening statement, but that does not prove the statement was connected to the homicide. The challenge is connecting the person, the opportunity, the weapon, the location, and the motive. Reward. In December 2025, Rachel's family announced a new $20,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. A reward is not proof that investigators have no leads. It is often an effort to motivate someone who knows an important fact but is afraid to speak. That person could be a friend, an acquaintance, a neighbor, or someone who heard a conversation after shooting. They may not know the entire story. They may only know that someone behaved strangely. They may have seen a vehicle near the apartment. They may have received a message that suddenly makes sense years later. In an unsolved case, even a small piece of information can become valuable when it connects to evidence already held by detectives. The reward also sends a public message. Rachel's family has not forgotten her, and law enforcement is still looking for the information that could move the case forward. What the family wants. Rachel's parents have repeatedly asked for justice and answers. They have also pushed authorities to work with other law enforcement agencies and to release information that could generate new tips. From the family's perspective, every year without an arrest creates more uncertainty. People move, memories fade, phones are replaced, messages disappear, and potential witnesses may convince themselves that what they know is not important. That is why families in cold cases often appeal directly to the public. They are not asking people to investigate the murder themselves. They are asking anyone with information to contact the proper authorities. That difference is important. Online theories can spread quickly, but they can also damage innocent people, contaminate witness memories, and distract attention from evidence. The safest and most responsible action is to submit information to investigators or an established anonymous tip service. The evidence that has not been revealed. The most important evidence in Rachel's case may be evidence the public has never seen. There may be forensic information from inside the apartment. There may be surveillance footage that investigators have reviewed but not released. There may be phone data connecting people to the area. There may be statements that contradict one another. There may even be evidence that points toward a specific individual but cannot yet be made public. The absence of public information does not mean that no evidence exists, but it also does not mean investigators have enough evidence to charge someone. That is the difficult middle ground in Rachel's case. Police say they have a strong theory. The family says they need answers. The public sees an unsolved murder. And somewhere between those three realities is the evidence that could finally reveal what happened. A theory is not justice. The word theory has become one of the most discussed terms in the case. A theory can be a starting point. It can organize evidence. It can help investigators decide where to search next. But Rachel's family does not need only a theory. They need the truth to be proven. They need a case that can survive court proceedings. They need the person responsible to be identified, arrested, and held accountable through the justice system. Until then, the case remains unresolved. For years after Rachel was shot inside her apartment, her family is still asking the same question. Who knew enough to hurt her? And who knows enough to explain what happened? We will examine the latest police position, the remaining unanswered questions, and the public appeal that could determine whether Rachel's case finally moves toward an arrest. The case that still has no answer. For years have passed since Rachel Hansen called 911 from inside her Gilbert apartment. For years since she reported that someone had entered while she was sleeping. For years since the gunman shot her and escaped. And 4 years since Rachel's family began waiting for the answer to one question: who killed her? As of the latest available reporting, no one has been arrested in Rachel Hansen's homicide. Gilbert police say the investigation remains active, and detectives have a strong theory and continuing leads. But the identity of the person responsible has not been publicly revealed. A change in the case. For a period of time, the case appeared to have stalled. A police report released in 2024 said that investigative leads had been exhausted, and the case was listed as inactive or suspended. The report itself contained more than 330 pages, but was heavily redacted. That meant the public could see that detectives had spent significant time investigating Rachel's murder. But the report did not provide a clear path to an arrest. There was no publicly named suspect. There was no confirmed motive. And there was no explanation for why the evidence had not been enough to move the case forward. Then in 2026, Gilbert police described the investigation as active again. The department confirmed that additional supplements had been added to the file after the original report was released. Police also said that more information could not be made public because revealing it might compromise the integrity of the investigation. This is one of the few signs of movement in the case. But it is important to understand what that statement does and does not mean. It does mean that police are still working with new or developing information. It may mean that detectives have identified a lead they believe is worth pursuing. It does not mean that an arrest is guaranteed. It does not mean that the public knows who the killer is. And it does not prove that the person investigators may be examining is responsible for Rachel's death. The person of interest. The heavily redacted police report reportedly referenced a person of interest. However, that person was not publicly charged, and authorities have not established that the individual committed the homicide. This is a critical distinction in any true crime story. A person of interest may be someone connected to the victim, the apartment complex, the investigation, or a particular lead. Police may want to interview that person. They may want to compare the person's statements with physical evidence. They may want to understand the person's whereabouts, relationships, or a possible connection to Rachel. But none of those actions prove guilt. The public should not attempt to identify or confront anyone connected to the investigation. Online speculation can interfere with the case and can also cause permanent harm to people who have not been charged with crime. The only conclusion that can responsibly be made is this: investigators have not publicly identified Rachel's killer, and no one has been convicted. The unanswered timeline, the timeline of the murder, remains one of the most important parts of the case. Rachel was inside her apartment during the early morning hours. She reported that someone entered while she was sleeping. The attacker shot her and left. Rachel called 911 shortly afterward. Officers responded, and she was taken to a hospital. She later died from her injuries. That sequence is known in broad terms, but many smaller details remain unclear. How long was the attacker inside the apartment? Was the shooter already familiar with the layout? Did a person enter through a locked door, an unlocked door, or another access point? Was there forced entry? Did a neighbor hear anything? Was the weapon recovered? Did the attacker leave in a vehicle? Were there security cameras that captured movement near the apartment? And was the earlier reported disturbance connected to shooting? Those questions may have answers inside the investigative file, but the public does not have access to every detail. That is why the case remains so difficult to understand from the outside. The public is seeing fragments. Investigators may be working with a much larger picture. The reward: to encourage information. Silent witnesses offer a reward of up to $20,000 for information leading to an arrest in Rachel's case, the YouTube +1. Tips can be submitted anonymously through Silent Witness. The listed phone number is 480-WITNESS or 480-948-6377. Spanish language tips can be submitted through 480-TESTIGO or 480-837-8446. A reward does not mean a tip must solve every part of a case. Someone may know only one detail. They may have seen a suspicious vehicle near the apartment. They may have heard someone describe a shooting. They may know that a person suddenly changed behavior after June 4th, 2022. They may possess an owed message, photograph, or recording that seemed unimportant at the time. Sometimes the information that breaks a cold case is not a dramatic confession. Sometimes it is a small detail that confirms what investigators already suspect. Rachel's family. For Rachel's parents, this case is not just a mystery to be discussed online. It is the loss of their daughter. It is the empty space left behind at family gatherings. It is the birthday that arrives without her. It is the holiday where they remember what should have been. Rachel's family has continued to speak publicly because silence could allow the case to disappear from attention. They've asked the public to remember that Rachel was a real person, not simply the victim in an unsolved crime story. She had friends. She had family. She had plans. And she deserved to live beyond the age of 19. The family has also pushed for authorities to work with other law enforcement agencies and to release information that may generate new tips. That request reflects the tension at the center of the case. Families want transparency. Investigators want to protect evidence. And prosecutors need a case that can survive in court. Those goals do not always move at the same speed. What we know and what we do not. What we know is that Rachel Hansen was shot inside her Gilbert apartment on June 4th, 2022. We know she called 911 and reported that someone had entered and shot her. We know she was transported to a hospital and later died. We know police investigated the death as a homicide. We know a large police file was released, but significant portions were redacted. We know no arrest has been announced. And we know Gilbert police now say the case is active and that detectives have a strong theory. What we do not know is equally important. We do not know the killer's identity. We do not know the confirmed motive. We do not know whether the reported incidents before the shooting were connected. We do not know what evidence supports the police theory. And we do not know what information investigators are currently withholding. Those gaps should not be filled with guesses. They should be filled with evidence. The final question. Rachel's case has remained unsolved because the available information has not yet produced a public arrest. But an unsolved case is not necessarily a forgotten case. Investigation is still active. The reward is still available. And someone may still possess the information detectives need. The person who entered Rachel's apartment may believe that enough time has passed. They may believe that witnesses have forgotten. They may believe that the case has disappeared. But Rachel's family has not forgotten. Her name is still being spoken. Her story is still being reported. And investigators are still asking for the one detail that could change everything. If you know something about Rachel Hansen's murder, contact Silent Witness at 4Hansen80Witness. You may remain anonymous. Do not post accusations online. Do not confront anyone. And do not attempt to investigate the case yourself. Give the information to authorities and let trained investigators determine whether it connects to the evidence. Rachel was 19 years old when she made that emergency call. She was trying to survive. She was trying to be heard. And now, years later, her family is still waiting for someone else to do the same, to speak, to tell the truth, and to finally explain what happened inside Rachel Hansen's apartment that night. Until that happens, one question remains. Who killed Rachel Hansen, and what is stopping the truth from coming out?